Okay, this is our second video on Friday, and I want to talk about what's going on with the Fed and the Treasury. As you know, there's been a great discussion going around on the internet, I see it every day, on whether the Fed is doing QE again. We saw a couple weeks ago where the Fed went in on three different auctions in 1 week and bought $43.4 billion, I believe, of the auctions. And people said that it wasn't QE. And believe it or not, the Fed has to say it's QE for it to be QE, literally in the law. Can you believe that? Now, what did they do that people think that this is not QE? We own $7 trillion of securities on our balance sheet. Now, when that income, that interest is paid, the Fed takes it in and they do their profit and losses for the year, okay, because of the money that comes in. They took some of that interest earned and they bought the $43 billion. So they didn't print new money to buy the securities. They used the interest from our Fed balance sheet to buy the security, okay? So that's the first thing. But that's not even the most important thing or the most wild thing that is going on right now. So now today, we get this, saying that the Treasury has stepped into the Fed's shoes, and they are now buying bonds in the open market. So this article points out that Powell's not raising the interest rates. The Fed is not about interest rates. The interest rates are the second thing. The Fed is about keeping the dollar and our funding in line, okay? And interest rates are one of the tools that we use to keep them in line. And we have stated here many times, given going on with the tariffs, look at the Swiss today, we just talked about them. Look at all the countries that are under attack because of the tariffs and all the moves they're gonna do. If I was the Fed, the last thing I would want to do is cut the interest rates and shoot the dollar in the head, which then could drive our interest rates up to 8, 9, 10%, okay? When I cut the interest rates, I want to do it so it sticks. But this is a political world. So they say here, you flash back to April 14th, Trump's Liberation Day, everything went crazy. And of course, that day, Bessent stepped in, hitting Bloomberg TV airways to soothe the traders, mentioning that he hinted that the Fed refused to lift a finger. The Treasury would flex its own muscular toolkit, potentially dialing up its Treasury buybacks, okay? And here are the Treasury buybacks. This is not the Fed buybacks. This is the US Treasury. And look at this week, they bought a record $10 billion of treasuries. Now, believe it or not, I know everything we've been doing is about they're trying to control the 30-year bonds of all the big sovereign nations. Believe it or not, they bought the 2- and the 3-year treasuries. So they're saying this Treasury QE light is the largest in U.S. history. Okay, I don't consider that a good sign, by the way. And they're treating it like a stock buyback, okay? They're just buying back their treasuries, and they're not asking permission. But the first line of the second paragraph is the critical line. It said it gobbled up this round relatively short maturity dates, July 2025 and May of 2027. Which would indicate that we're having issues even on the short end, right? Because if you're going to do this and you're stepping out of your lane and everything, you would want to control the one thing that we perceive as the problem. At least the Fed perceives the long end as the problem. These guys went in and bought the short end. But now this article came out on Tuesday, and they're saying on Wednesday that they're going to start going in and buying the long end, 2035 and 2045. And they're going to double their buyback limit from $1 billion to $2 billion. So they're upping the purchases. This is Treasury. This is not the Fed. So here the guy discusses, is the Fed taking the Fed's place? Is what's going on here, and is he going to force Powell into cutting rates? Now, here's an analysis of some guy on Twitter, and he's saying this $10 billion is not merely a matter of curve management or liquidity soothing. It was a strategic signal to institutional participants that the Treasury is willing to intervene quietly behind the scenes when rollover risk begins to threaten core financial stability. So what are they saying? When we bring these long bonds, we're going to make sure they're successful, the auction, or we'll buy them ourselves, okay? Now, the interesting thing, they bought 10 billion, they offered to buy 22.87 billion, which is twice as much debt as the Treasury was willing to accept. The scale of the excess demand to liquidate is in itself a warning sign. So what are they saying here? The Treasury says, we'll buy $10 billion. The institutional market says, here, 22.87 billion. They want to get rid of their treasuries. They're looking for liquidity. And here he says, which I pointed out, this is a quiet acknowledgement that there's stress even on our short end, which no one's talking about. We always say the Fed controls the short end, the market controls the long end. Maybe, but it's not like this. Then number two, it's not QE, but it functions like QE. I don't know, guys. I don't know. What do we do here? If it looks like QE, sounds like QE, does the same thing as QE, but it's not QE, what's going on? And then they points out again that the overwhelming volume of offers suggests that banks, funds, and foreign reserve holders are facing constraints. Treasury effectively chose which counterparties to relieve, creating a selective outlet for stress. Okay, think of the importance of this statement. They had 40 institutions come to them with $22.87 billion. They accepted 20 institutions for $10 billion, and they selected the ones that so they said, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of you, not you, but you. I don't know if that's a good situation, but it's what's happening. So the Fed and the Treasury are managing on two critical fronts, and looks like they're not actually working together. I don't know how the markets are going to accept this. So first is they have the maturity wall. We know what Yellen did. She issued around 23% of short-term paper. That $7 trillion is coming due this year, all right? So how do they do it? Do they roll into the short, or do they try to roll into the long? So what is Treasury saying? We're going to roll it into the long and we'll buy the long to keep the interest rates down? But they bought the short, so do they feel that the short is under attack? I mean, long and short, we have to have one way to go. I don't know which way this is going to happen. And then they're saying, look, we also have the market is functioning under a constraint. We're issuing all this stuff, and Treasury opted to surgically absorb selected maturities to a controlled buyback window. This move signals stress in the system and allowing policy makers to avoid triggering broader alarm. So if they started QE, trust me, it would not be good, in my personal opinion. Obviously, both the Fed and the Treasury are saying exactly the same thing. Now here's the three, you can look them up yourself, where we did something similar to this in the past. You can go read it yourself. So now here's the 10-year bond. Here's the problem, people. We went in and we bought them, okay? We all know that. And yet, look at where the yield is. It didn't go down. You know, everyone's saying 450 is like, you know, whatever, the red line, we can't cross it and all this other stuff. Basically, even with the Treasury buying our long end, $10 billion, the yield's still up there. I would say, without knowledge, who knows? But I don't think this is a good sign. What do you think? What's going on between the Fed and the Treasury? Are they going to work together? Are they not going to work together? Is Bessent willing to do this to sink the dollar, where the Federal Reserve is not willing to sink the dollar? You tell me in the comments. And thanks for following me, and thanks for listening.